Now, the nation's economy has recorded a 0.2% contraction in the third quarter. This follows the nation's GDP recording two consecutive expansions previously. Agriculture, mining and construction are the biggest contributions to this quarter's declines. R&B economist Siobhan Redford joins us now to discuss the GDP print. Thank you so much for your time, Siobhan. Siobhan, was it all just a sea of bad news?
Pretty much. I think that said, it is a sea of bad news that we were expecting. Agriculture, we don't have the high frequency data, but for most of the sectors that we saw contracting, that was expected. So I suppose even though ultimately the outcome was more negative than expected, we did see, positive contributions coming primarily from the tertiary sector, and that was, where the kind of mystery was: how good was it? How resilient was it? So perhaps not strong enough to beat what we had already seen in terms of the primary and secondary sectors.
Yeah, I mean, talking about bad news that we expected. Of course, we did expect negative movements coming out of the manufacturing sector, and we did see there the largest contributor to that contraction in manufacturing coming from the food, beverages and tobacco division. But what does this signal? Is it coming from the supply side or the demand side?
I think when you look at, a sector like manufacturing, it's really about the supply side.
Yeah.
They're facing continuous load shedding, and yes, it has improved to some extent in the third quarter, but we also have seen the most load shedding in this year than relative to any other year, and then obviously all the logistical constraints which are just piling on to these kind of woes for the manufacturing sector.
Yeah, and I was actually a little bit surprised at how negative this was because, as you said, we experienced less load shedding. But I guess now you're getting a situation where the logistical issues seem to be getting worse instead of actually getting better. I also did notice that the construction industry decreased at 2.8%. Is there just no light at the end of the tunnel, at least in the short to medium term for that sector?
I mean, it's come up to a great extent out of the worst, I think.
Yeah.
But, obviously, when you're in a high interest rate environment, that's going to, definitely deter new build, particularly on the residential side. When we're in the kind of situation we are in from a more business point of view, where infrastructure is failing and it doesn't seem like it is getting better, that things are getting done, then you aren't going to see private sector investment that leads to more construction. So, it really is kind of a double whammy on that side, where both the residential and non-residential sides are probably being hit by a lack of demand because of high interest rates, but also because of the multiple structural issues that the country is currently facing.
You spoke about some of the positive movements that we saw, seeming that they were coming from the expenditure side. There were obviously pressures, but some green shoots. Just talk to us about those.
So, on the expenditure side, it really was a big kind of positive impulse from the kind of slower pace of imports.
Yeah.
And this probably relates to the fact that we saw a really big impulse, I think, in the first half of the year in terms of imports, particularly for, say, solar PV installations, and that is possibly calming down to some extent. So that was positive, but it's always a bit of a difficult one to say that a slower pace of growth in imports is a good thing.
Yeah.
It did contribute positively to the outcomes, but we now know, when we look especially what's happening now, which is only going to be reflected in the fourth quarter, that when you have a very slow pace, when your imports are slowing, it is also potentially the inputs to your manufacturing process. And so that then is going to have snowball effects on the rest of the economy. So, this might just have been the, kind of first quarter in which this is happening.
Siobhan, I mean, could this third, because we did have two quarters of positive growth. So this is the first quarterly contraction that we are seeing this year. Could this be a blip in a still positive story for the year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just smiling because to say
Yeah.
it's positive is you know,
Yeah.
it is positive. It's
Yeah.
better than at times we expected because it has been positive primarily. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's such a low level of growth that it's, you know, it really is pushing it. But at the same time, could it be a blip? Absolutely. I worry though, given the escalation in the news feed about the issues related to Transnet, that actually it's probably going to continue into the final quarter of this year, and that we might only start seeing some resilience building up to that in the new year.
Could we see significant green shoots in the fourth quarter, considering the nature of it?
Oh, wow, that is a tough question.
Yeah.
You know, I think some green shoots could come from the fact that we have seen your interest rates stabilize. So they
Yes.
remain high, which is definitely a concern. And you see consumers still remaining under some constraint there. But, you know, it does seem that by and large, we're at the peak of the hiking cycle. And so people can plan about, you know, the future. They know that, you know, okay, this is how much I'm paying for interest and my debt now. And it's probably not going to change anymore. So now I can plan.
Yeah.
So that might help a little bit with consumption and broaden the strengthen consumption from being just purely semi-durables like clothing and footwear
Yeah.
to more broadly. But, you know, I think the green shoots really are most likely to start coming out kind of in a year from now at the earliest.
Yeah.
You know, there is positive news that they are doing things, you know, with regards to the ports, you know, looking at accelerating the improvement of the Durban port, you know, so it can take on bigger ships. You know, there is news flow about that, but, you know, that takes time.
Yeah.
But,
True.
you know, so I think that those green shoots are probably not this year's story, but hopefully next year's.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and allowing us to get insight into your crystal ball. Thank you so much for your time, Siobhan. That was Siobhan Redford, economist from RMB.